Somewhere right now, there is a child who cannot feel it when their own tooth cuts into their tongue. No wince, no cry, nothing. Their parents won't find out until they see the blood. This isn't a hypothetical, it's a documented medical reality, and it happens to a small number of children born every year with a nervous system missing one specific piece of wiring. You've spent your entire life treating pain as the enemy, something to numb, avoid, complain about. But somewhere on Earth right now, there are people who would give almost anything to feel a paper cut, because a life with zero pain isn't a superpower. It's one of the most dangerous conditions known to medicine, and understanding why tells you exactly what pain was built to do. Let's start with what pain actually is, because most people get it backwards. Pain is not damage. Pain is a warning about damage generated by your nervous system, and the two can be completely disconnected. Nociceptors are the sensory neurons that detect harmful stimuli, heat, pressure, chemical injury, and they fire a signal that travels up the spinal cord to the brain. The brain then decides how much that signal matters and produces the sensation you feel. This is why a paper cut can feel worse than a much more serious injury sustained in the heat of the moment. Adrenaline and attention change the volume, not the wiring. The system was built by evolution for one job: keep the organism intact long enough to reproduce. Every species with a nervous system complex enough to move on purpose has some version of this alarm. Remove it and you don't get a fearless human. You get a body with no early warning system for its own destruction. Now, here's where it gets specific. There's a gene called SCN9A that builds one component of a sodium channel called NaV1.7, sitting almost exclusively in the nerve cells that carry pain signals toward your spinal cord. In 2006, researchers at University College London and the University of Cambridge traced a rare inherited condition back to loss of function mutations in this exact gene. The case that led them there was a 10-year-old known locally for performing street theater, where he would push knives through his arm and walk on burning coals in front of crowds, feeling nothing. He wasn't reckless. His nervous system simply never sent the message that anything was wrong. Researchers eventually gave the condition its own name, channelopathy associated insensitivity to pain, because it didn't cleanly fit the older diagnostic categories doctors had been using for decades. That boy's story has a hard ending. His family later told researchers he had died from injuries after jumping off a rooftop during a stunt, having come to believe nothing could hurt him. It's the detail that shows up in almost every account of this condition, because it captures the actual danger. Pain isn't just about the moment of injury, it's what teaches a person. Over thousands of tiny lessons starting in infancy, where the edges of their body are, and what the world can do to it. Without those lessons, there's nothing stopping the mistake from repeating, and no internal signal telling you when to stop. There are two related conditions here, and it's worth knowing the difference. Congenital insensitivity to pain, tied to SCN9A, leaves people with essentially every other sense intact. They feel touch, pressure, temperature. They simply never feel pain. A related and more severe condition, congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis, involves different genes, typically NTRK1, and adds another missing system on top: the inability to sweat. People with this form can't perceive noxious stimuli and also can't regulate their body temperature through sweating, which means a fever or a hot day becomes genuinely life-threatening. Since their bodies have no way to cool down and no pain signal warning them they're overheating. Case reports describe children with this condition developing dangerously high, unexplained fevers throughout early childhood, hospitalized repeatedly before doctors identify what's actually happening. The physical toll builds slowly and mostly goes unnoticed by the person living through it. Children with these conditions have been documented biting through their own fingertips and tongues during teething, since there's no pain to teach them to stop. Case studies describe missing digits, dental damage, and corneal ulcers from children who scratch or rub their eyes without the discomfort that would normally stop them. Fractures go unnoticed because there's no limp, no wince, nothing prompting a hospital visit until swelling or a visibly wrong angle gives it away. Left untreated over years, this produces something specific called Charcot joint disease. Repeated undetected trauma destroys the joint from the inside, and the disease leads to fractures, dislocations, and deformities across multiple bones and joints, especially in the feet, in a process usually seen in advanced diabetes. But that shows up decades earlier in people who can't feel the small warnings. warnings that would normally prompt rest or treatment. Now, here's the strange twist. Humans aren't the only mammal to lose pain deliberately. Deep underground in East Africa, there's a rodent that evolution turned into a natural experiment in exactly this condition, and it did it on purpose. The naked mole rat lives its entire life packed into tunnels with dozens of other mole rats, breathing air thick with carbon dioxide, and it has evolved almost total insensitivity to two specific kinds of pain. It doesn't feel the burn of capsaicin, the same chemical that makes chili peppers hot, and it is the only known mammal completely indifferent to the sting of acid. Researchers trace this back to mutations in the very same gene humans need for pain, NaV1.7, along with a related receptor called TRA, meaning this species independently discovered through millions of years of evolution the exact genetic switch that human researchers only found in 2006. For a mole rat, this isn't a disorder. Crowded tunnel air is naturally high in carbon dioxide, which turns into acid on damp tissue. So an animal that felt normal pain there would be in constant agony just from breathing. Losing that particular pain channel wasn't a birth defect. It was an adaptation to an underground life that would otherwise be unlivable. The difference between the mole rat and the human child born with the same mutation is entirely about environment. Underground, in that specific niche, it's a survival advantage. Walking around a modern world full of stairs, stoves, and broken glass, it's a countdown. For decades, the human version of this condition looked like a cruel accident of biology with no upside. Then drug researchers realized that they'd been handed something extraordinary, a natural experiment showing exactly which switch, if you could flip it safely in an ordinary person, would turn pain off without touching anything else. If you could design a drug that blocked the same channel these patients are missing, you would have a painkiller with none of the risk of opioids, because it never touches the brain's reward circuitry at all. That chase went on for nearly 2 decades without a clean answer. NaV1.7 turned out to be a difficult target to drug precisely, but in January 2025, the FDA approved suzetrigine, marketed as Jernav, the first new class of pain medication in 25 years and the first drug in a class known as selective NaV1.8 pain signal inhibitors, an alternative to opiates. It targets a neighboring channel instead of NaV1.7 itself, but the underlying idea is identical. Block the pain signal at the peripheral nerve before it ever reaches the brain, and you get real relief with none of the addiction risks. It exists because a small number of people and one very unusual rodent were living proof that the switch could be flipped at all. So what does that leave you with? That ache in your shoulder, the paper cut, the headache you're annoyed about right now? None of it is a malfunction. It's a message being delivered exactly the way it was built to be delivered, by a system so old that a rodent species and a rare human mutation both stumbled onto ways to switch it off. One on purpose, one by accident. The people born without it don't get a life free of suffering. They get a life spent guessing where the danger is, because the one system built to tell them was never switched on. Somewhere tonight, your body will send you a small, unpleasant signal, and you'll flinch and move and forget about it in seconds. That flinch is not a flaw. It's the oldest favor your body ever does for you.